All right, I will call the second meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee to order for the 82nd legislative session, and we will start by calling the roll. If you would, please, esteemed Secretary.
Senator Harris, Senator Orenshaw,
Present.
Senator Don Darrell Loop, Senator Nguyen, Senator Hansen, Senator Krasner, Senator Stone, Chair Scheibel.
Here. And please mark Senator Harris present when she arrives. Welcome back, everybody. Today we have a couple of presentations on our agenda as well as two bills. Since it is still the first week, I'm going to make a couple of reminders about how we run our Judiciary Committee here in the Senate. We do start on time, but the members of my committee are also incredibly busy, and I understand that they may be late from time to time. They may have to leave early from time to time, and I ask that all of you, extend that courtesy to them to, be patient as they come and go, as they have other committees to present in, meetings to go to, and other business to attend to. We try to extend that same consideration to all of you who are presenting and testifying. If for some reason you need to go early in the calendar, late in the calendar, try to let me know or let our committee manager know, and we do our best to accommodate. By the same token, if we make a mistake, I will borrow a phrase from our colleague Senator Spearman. Please attribute it to my head and not my heart. We do our best to make sure that everybody is heard and has their opportunity to make presentations, to present their bills, to testify in this committee. And so please let us know if anybody has been inadvertently overlooked. With that, I also want to remind everybody about the structure of bill hearings in Senate Judiciary, because we're going to have our first two hearings today. From time to time in the Judiciary Committee, we get so busy and we have bills that are so interesting that I will have to limit either the presentation time or the time allowed for testimony in support or opposition. That is not happening today. Today, our presenters will have as much time as they need to present the bill. The members of the committee will be allowed to ask the bill presenters questions. Every member of the committee is entitled to one bite at the apple. So we will start with, giving each person one opportunity to ask all of their questions to the presenters. I call on the members of the committee in roughly the order that I'm aware that they have questions. If there is time after everybody has had their first bite at the apple and there are follow-up questions, I may call on members for those follow-up questions as time allows. After the members have had a chance to ask questions of the presenters, we'll give the presenters another opportunity to make any summarizing remarks, and then we'll go to testimony in support of the bill. Each person's testimony is going to be limited to 2 minutes, and we will do testimony here in Las Vegas, here in Carson City, in person, in Las Vegas in person, and then over the phone. After we have testimony in support, we'll go to testimony in opposition. Testimony in opposition is also 2 minutes per person, and we will do the same format here in Carson City, in Las Vegas in person, and then via phone. After that, we will invite the presenters of the bill up to give some closing remarks, clarify any new questions that have arisen, things like that, and then we'll close the hearing on the bill. In Senate Judiciary, at least at the beginning, we don't generally hold work sessions on the same day as a bill hearing, so don't expect to see any votes from us today or in the next week or two. And as always, if you have questions about that or about that process, please don't hesitate to ask. I just want to make sure that nobody is, belaboring under a bad assumption and feels that their bill's not getting their due process or that they aren't being heard, when in fact that's just the way that we manage our schedule and our responsibilities here. So I think that is all of the housekeeping that I have for today, and I'm very excited to have two important agencies with us this afternoon, to present to us about what's going on in their agencies. They've both experienced, we'll start with the Department of Corrections. I'm sorry, brief recess. So we will start with the Department of Corrections, who has a wonderful director, Zarenda, joining us once again to give us some updates on what's been happening at the Department of Corrections over the last few months and years. And I believe he has some members of his staff here. I would invite you all up to the front to introduce yourselves and open up the conversation.
Okay, good afternoon, Senator Chair Scheibel and Senator Vice Chair Harris and the members of the Senate Judiciary. My name's James Zarenda. I'm the Director for the Nevada Department of Correction, and today I'd just like to give a quick overview of what our issues are and where we plan to take the agency, or where I plan to take the agency, and how it's going to affect the communities and how it's going to affect all of us and our families. So first, our biggest struggle this whole year is probably across the state is going to be the staffing issues. However, I have some options that we are exploring with even having marketing companies that are going to help us with all those companies over in California that are basically going out of business or laying off. We're going to look at starting to target certain places around the state that could come into Nevada because it's a better place to live, and also it'll be a better place to work. So there's going to be some options with that, and we're also teaming up with Health and Human Services about medical and clinical staff, with also doing something similar. It's just, however, it's targeting other agencies and states that have medical personnel that are just looking to come to Nevada or looking to expand into a different state. So we have some options that we're going to work on that I'm very hopeful for. And however, another big thing that's not just getting staff, it's staff wellness. We're going to be working on staff wellness programs, and also which will help with the retention. That's going to be my biggest concern, because you can't do successful programs, you can't keep safety and security where it should be if you don't have appropriate numbers of staff to do what we need to do. The second biggest thing on my end is also the infrastructure. Infrastructure of the facilities are just like we have a facility that's here in Carson City that was built in the 1960s. That had very limited maintenance upkeep, engineering upkeep. That's going to be a problem. It's going to be another auditing device that I'm going to have to come with all the facilities to try to audit the infrastructures to see what's going to be most important to be able to keep public safety, staff safety, and also offenders safe from each other. With that comes the programming piece. I've mentioned this to those that have known me before. I'm very passionate about programming and how important it is to make sure that those that are under our care as the offenders in our system actually have the tools and the ability to succeed when they get out. Getting out better than they came in with the appropriate evidence-based tools is actually going to be reducing violence in our communities and making sure that we are not re-victimizing our families and friends. I'm not naive to say it works for everybody, but when you have evidence-based programs that have been designated by the Department of Justice as evidence-based means that over a 3-year period, that program has been the data shows that 51% or more of those that have been in that program met the actual needs and goal of that program. So it does change behavior if you're doing behavior programming, substance use disorder, mental health programming. We need to add the more evidence-based programs rather than just programs that the clinicians like to do because it makes them feel good, or that offenders like the program. It has to be evidence-based, because I need to show that the resources that I'm sending to do these evidence-based programs are actually going to affect those offenders when they go into the community. If you have a chance of looking at even the sentencing policy division they have on their website, you could see this is where I use their data. When their data comes in to show that the majority of the offenders coming into our system are violent charges and sex charges, those are where I have to refocus our programming to. And when you start looking at the majority of the violence programs, then we should be focusing on evidence-based programs that changes behaviors to reduce violence, and they are out there. And that's where my resources have to go. There's MRT, moral recognition therapy, DBT, dialectic behavioral therapy, and Hustle 2.0, which is geared towards evidence-based of changing behaviors of violent offenders. That is important because that's where I'm going to be funneling my resources. Because those are the offenders that I need to touch and reach the most. So like I said, when they get out there, they're not re-victimizing our communities and us and our families. So which goes with all this is also technology. Technology is very big to me. When I look around the country, I meet every 6 months with every director or secretary or commissioner that runs all the prison systems in the country. We meet every 6 months. I've been doing this since 2010 through the CLA, the Correctional Leaders Association, and we meet to go over what technology is actually going to help with reducing victims in the community, crime, with reducing violence in the facilities. So you'll see through this session, there are some bills that I am hopeful for that will also allow me to issue and distribute wireless devices. The wireless devices, I have to do some education on it for everybody so they know it's not an iPad or a tablet that works like it does in our homes, but it actually is going to help me be able to do what successful programs we need to do. And believe it or not, and I have a list of them that I'll be presenting in these bills, is that we are pretty much the only state in the country that does not do the wireless devices in the prison system. Us, and I believe it's North Dakota. So these are going to be important because they are shown, just like North Carolina, that it's reduced 35% in their violent crimes happening in the facilities. And I'll explain that as you see these bills come up with this and how important it's going to be to us, and also how it's going to reconnect the families. Connecting the families and the support groups in the communities with those offenders that are trying to do well or that will be eventually going home is going to be important, because those resources that they can get and those family connections is what's going to make them successful. I'll explain all this even off to the side if you ever want to understand the wireless devices, how big of a deal it is, what they do, what they don't do, security-wise, and how it's important even to the government with Department of Justice with counterterrorism information. So I mean, it's a wide range of stuff that it does that I think is going to be really beneficial to everybody. And the best thing of it too is there's no fiscal note to it. Another thing that I know is going to be important to me, that I have to change the culture in the agency, and to stress that when we try to change behaviors, it can't be left up to the Department of Correction. It's all of our responsibilities. It's the public, it's the clinicians, it's the legislature, it's the all the community providers that are actually are trying to put blame on other individuals for not being successful in re-entering those into the community. It's all of our responsibility. So what I'm planning on doing is making it a lot easier for the public, for volunteers, and for the services to actually come into the facilities. It can't be blocked. It has to be a community effort to change those behaviors. And if I don't have the money, resources, or the staff to do it, I will get it. And I already have reached out to pretty much most of the agencies that I know are going to be, and activist groups that I know will be able to help me. And another big thing that is free too is the families. I have to get the families involved with changing the behaviors, especially those that have children, that are respecting their children. They did something wrong that they could be ashamed of or need help with. Those families are going to be my biggest resource to changing those behaviors and making sure that they don't victimize their families when they get out, but also that they have a resource to be able to make their lives sustainable and their families sustainable. With that, is my last part, is that is going to be opening up more resources than ever before on job opportunities. I've already connected with many, which I can share, working through even Hope for Prisoners in Las Vegas, connected to they have over $5 million in grant money and funds that have come in to connect the businesses with the offenders in our facilities. We've already started working with Department of Motor Vehicle to station the CDL license program in a couple of our facilities, the women's facility down in Las Vegas, Southern Desert down in outside of Las Vegas, and also up here in Carson City. And having those already approved and licensed companies that do the licensure and that do the education schooling for CDL to be able to issue it. These are big jobs, and there's hundreds of jobs available that they're looking for us for help to be able to go out there to work for them, these companies. That's a big deal. Welding is another big thing in the communities, that they are very hard to find for welders. Well, that's where I'm going to start really trying to capitalize on. We already have companies that are going to be purchasing welding simulators for us. Those welding simulators are going to be strategically placed around the state in the correctional facilities so that we could do the training and certifications before anyone gets out the door. These are big deals, and it's a whole array of different things that I'm not even bringing up that we have in our pocket that we're going to be doing. And I truly believe you're going to see with changes in maybe some of the laws, but you're going to see how we are going to be able to reduce victimizations in our community for all of us, because I know it works. I've seen agencies around the country that have worked, and this is where we're going to bring our state, and this is what we're going to show in the future of how successful we are. That's pretty much all I have. Any questions you have, I'm open. And like I said, it doesn't even have to be here. You want some education on some of the stuff that I have in my head that we are going to be doing. I think it'll be advantageous for me to be able to educate as many people as I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have questions from members of the committee? Senator Orenshaw.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Mrs. Renda, great to see you back here as Director of NDOC. Several years ago, there were reports in the Review Journal about inmates at NDOC who had expired their entire term, but because the reentry plan was not complete, they were still in custody at NDOC facilities. And I wonder if you have any update on where we're at there. Has that problem been fixed, or are there still inmates in that situation who've expired their term, but they're still there because the plan has not been completed or some other issues?
James Arnett, for the record, it depends what that was really talking about. We do not hold people past the end of their sentence, but they have estimated sentences for parole that they will meet. If there's no plan set up through parole or through the individuals or through wherever they're going to be released to, that can hold up their releases. It's actually a plan that they have to have for when they go in front of the parole board or out on parole. That could be the issue that it was brought up, but we do not hold people past the end of their sentence expiration dates, or we shouldn't be. I don't know if it's ever happened, but we shouldn't be doing that.
Okay, thank you, Director. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Wynn.
Thank you, and it's good to see you back here in the legislative building and back at NDOC. I have a question. You had mentioned a couple of reentry programs that you were working with in the community, different various nonprofits that have success. Is there any, and I know that evidence-based practices are such an important part of your personal philosophy that you've taken into the department. What are you doing to make sure that the investments and the partnerships that you're doing are having evidence-based? Like, there are several organizations that deal with reentry programs, and some of them are way more successful. Maybe don't have the name recognition, but what kind of like monitoring or, I guess, accountability are you looking at those?
So James Renner, for the record, what's very difficult is when you have individuals that are not on parole, that have finished with their parole or probation, we cannot actually track them unless we're tracking recidivism. So when you're talking about data, if they're not coming back into my system, I can't even track whether or not they're incarcerated in another country or where they ended up, unless we're tracking them through parole or probation that we know when they're coming back. So it's very difficult to do. So really the recidivism is what I have to calculate it on, and also testimonies from either the companies that the individual still showing up, still has been promoted, is now moving on. It's really going to be from the companies themselves. It's going to be very difficult for me to track unless it's through parole and probation, because I can't track the individuals once they're on their own. and when they go from jobs to job. So it's going to be difficult, but I think the only way is through the recidivism rates, which right now, just to educate people on recidivism, there is no standard definition of recidivism. Just so everybody knows that, every state has pretty much a different definition of recidivism. Department of Justice, through the Council of State Governments, tried 3 years ago. They failed at trying to get a recidivism definition because a lot of systems are so different. You have 5 unified systems in the country: Connecticut, Alaska, Delaware, New Hampshire, and Hawaii, which means that the jails and prisons are the same, where it's different from Nevada. So recidivism means something different there. We calculate our own recidivism, and it's basically any individual that returns on a different sentence. So my recidivism will be different from a county jail's recidivism, or even what the state believes they use through the sentencing division. I wish there was an easier way to calculate the data on that, but there really is not an easy way to do that, except if the companies tell me.
May I follow up, Chair? I guess more of a comment. I had some experience in the nonprofit sector, and I know that recidivism, obviously, that's a broad terminology, but there are other things that I would encourage the department to look at. I know that there are different reentry programs that have had more success in placing like individuals in longer term jobs that pay more, as opposed to some organizations that are filtering people into lower paying jobs that are in the like $10, $12 hour. And then there are some that are able to place people as part of their reentry programs in $20, $25 an hour paying jobs. So I guess more of a comment.
Sorry, but James Renner, for the record, just so you know, already since I got here, I discontinued all the minimum wage jobs that you're talking about. We were placing individuals in minimum wage jobs out of Casa Grande transitional housing in Las Vegas. That's probably the worst thing we could do. We're not here to fill jobs. We're here to get sustainable jobs for those individuals to succeed. And those lower paying jobs, even though I got many, many calls from 7-Eleven and these fast food places angry at me, it's not my goal to place them in jobs. We're trying to get sustainability, because you're not going to be able to have a family and sustain your life and be successful on those other jobs.
Thank you. Senator Harris.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. Good to see you, Director. I just want to follow up on the 2 questions that my colleagues have asked. I don't know if we heard a bit about what it is the department is doing to ensure folks are released when they should be, and that the lack of a plan is not keeping people beyond the time with which they are entitled to release. Now, I understand it's not full term. However, if you've served and probation says you should go, I don't think there should be 1 day longer that you should be sitting. And so has the department done, like, what are efforts that are in place to ensure that we don't have people sitting, and the only reason they are sitting there is because they're waiting on something for you all to do so that they can be released?
James Renner, for the record, I 100% agree with you. I mean, trust me, I don't want people in my care either. I would rather be out of business. And it's not fair, and I know that's what we're working on, as you know, even through the sentencing policy. And I have our OMB here today that can explain that, but it is a process that has happened over the years, with even the earned credits and the meritorious credits that are not right, that have been changes of laws that were not grandfathered, so everybody's on a different time. The systems that we have for our tracking and classification systems are outdated, that's one of the big reasons where there, and even our TINs that I'm asking for is another system that we can use for tracking of classification in our classification system. That's part of it, but there's even a lot more. But the meritorious credits is really the big thing that people misunderstand and know, because it's hard for me even to understand.
Yeah, sentence credits are a mess, right? Everybody knows that, as you know, working on it. But what about the plans that these people need to be released?
James Arenda for the record, and we could pull up our OMB staff, but So those plans we work with, and if I think the plans you're talking about are the plans for release plans, not only for our discharges that are right to the community, but through parole. And that's why it's a big deal that I get these resources in that connects them to the services, because that has to be in their plan. The housing has to be in their plan. If they came in on substance use disorder related crimes, I have to have that in the plan. And we work on that plan, we present it to the parole. They have to come up with their own plan, but they use our plan to be able to resource it with them. I don't know if that helps, but you might.
No, I think that's great. I think you get the point that we want those plans to be done quicker, and that, that should not be a reason why someone is staying behind bars when they've gone through the process and have been granted release. As to Senator Wynn's question about evidence-based practices with reentry programs, I don't know if I heard whether that is the standard by which you are using or not. I want to summarize what I think I heard, and then please tell me if it's correct. Right now, you're relying on claims of reentry programs to assess whether they are working and have no internal process to determine which programs are worth the department's time and which ones are not. Is that right?
James Renner, for the record, you're correct, because once they discharge from the Department of Corrections, we don't track down what jobs they go to unless we connected it. If they have their own business, we don't track them. Once they're out of my care, it's nothing. However, I go with talking about, here's a little education on evidence-based and best practices. Evidence-based, if I have a program that has been proven to evidence-based, I am taking it at face value that the Department of Justice has identified and certified that it is going to affect and to change the behaviors or the goals of that program 51% of the time. Will it work? I'm trusting them. Best practices is not the same. Best practices programming is a program that there's been no proven evidence to work, but there's no other program out there. So a lot of the states will use these best practice programs because they don't have an evidence base for the specific reason, like a sex predator. You're not going to find a sex predator program in the entire country that's evidence-based. You just don't. So you use best practices, which means that you get the programs out there that some agencies have said have worked is better than doing nothing. And that's where you funnel your resources. If that helps. I don't know if I confused it.
No, yeah, I think I get that, which is why I have the question. You're not using evidence-based programs for reentry and are attempting to use best practices because you can't find any evidence-based programming for reentry, or because it's too hard? What's the reasoning for going, I guess, best practices versus finding an evidence-based program that works and using that?
James Renner, for the record, I'll try to clarify this. We are using evidence-based programs for the offenders. When you're talking about reentry and when they discharge to a job, there's no evidence base to say that welding is going to change someone's life. It's not gonna. So best practices means that around the country, placing them into sustainable jobs means they have a better chance to succeed. There's no evidence based on it. It just means that because you can't track it. No agency can actually track it forever or over a 3-year period of whether they stayed in this job, went to that job, or not, because they don't belong to the Department of Correction anymore. So there's no evidence based for that. The programs leading up to the reentry have to be all evidence-based, whether it's substance use, whether it's behavioral. Like I said, the behavior programs have to be evidence-based. And when they discharge, we hope that they get the services when they get out there.
Okay, Madam Chair, if you'll just indulge me one last time. Thank you. I guess what I'm trying to get at is not the act of placing someone, but let's say I want to compare partnering up with Hope for Prisoners versus Hope for Inmates. Program A, Program B. What metrics are you using to decide which partnership will be more effective and leads to better results, if any?
Oh, I think I got you. James Renner, for the record. So when you do assessments on individuals, It all depends on their needs of what programs you have to go into. So if Hope for Prisoners has an MRT program, and this Hope for another company does not have it, you don't go with you got to go with the programs that meet the needs of the individuals you're looking for. And everyone has to be done on an individual care basis. So it's an individualized treatment programs we put them in, because everybody's different, everybody's needs are different. But I'll use the resources of anyone I can that has the program that's evidence-based for that specific program need. So it's all on the needs of what programs you actually use, because there's some programs that'll work for you that won't work for me. So it's all on the needs of the actual individual. And then we put them into programs, because another interesting thing is some programs actually make individuals worse. So you have to be careful of that. We have to make sure that the needs are appropriate, clinically related, that they were identified clinically, that they need this is their needs. Then we put the program that's evidence-based to meet those needs. So it's not one needs fits all, and it's not one program fits all. It all depends. But I'm going to use any resources I could to be able to get those evidence-based programs, because if I can't get it anywhere else, I'm going to use anybody I can.
Okay, thank you.
I had Senator Hansen next. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, Director, it's great to see you back in Nevada. You bring in expertise and an interest in this that gives me great confidence, frankly. Having sat on this committee for 7 sessions, you're a breath of fresh air, and we're delighted to have you back. At least I am. A couple of quick questions. One, part of the reentry issues that have happened in the past was the difficulty of getting identification cards for the inmates. I know Julie Butler at DMV, Senator Buck, and myself have worked pretty aggressively trying to get that issue addressed completely, finally. Sounds like a simple one, but apparently it was remarkably complex. I'm just wondering if you can update us on where you are on that.
James Arenda for the record. So what's happening right now is we issue Nevada Department of Correction identification cards to every offender coming in. The complex of this is we go based upon the commitment note from the court. So the commitment from the court says that it's John Doe. We identify from the commitment we get on that day, your identification card is going to say John Doe. That individual does not necessarily mean that that is John Doe. It means the court's commitment paper says it's John Doe. However, a lot of these individuals have multiple names, multiple aliases, and also they may or may not ever have been identified, which is very scary. And this is not unique to here. When you get arrested or someone gets arrested and you tell the police pull you over and book you, if you have no identification and I say I'm John Doe, I get booked as John Doe. Goes to the courts, you get courts identify you as John Doe. You get to the corrections, it's John Doe, you get released as John Doe. Next time I get arrested, I tell them my name is James Doe. I get arrested, it goes on to commit as James Doe, comes into corrections, now you're James Doe, and it gets connected because it's similar to John Doe. Then you go through the system. We have to release you as James Doe. Goes on and on. There's some individuals with 50 names. And trust me, this is not unique to Nevada. It's all around the country. So here's the identification issues we have. How do you prove identification if you have no fingerprints? What if you have no birth certificate? We go on the commitment letter, what you're in on at the time. If we can't verify, we mark on your card unverified. So when you get released, you keep your identification card, but it clearly says unverified. So if you want to go and cash a check, you want to use it for a hotel room, it still identifies, or the police pull you over, it's unverified, but we still have identification. Verified identification means that we can verify through birth certificate or fingerprints. Then you get released, and it's under there as verified, John Doe verified. That's the only what we can do with the identification cards, which I think there's a bill coming up this year too to look at changing that. I truly believe that's the best system we have. The problem we have is getting that verified identification. Some offenders don't want it. Going to get birth certificates in other countries, they only require you to be there in person. We can't do that. Now, which is going to help me with the, it's kind of premature to say this, but the wireless devices that's going to allow email. The reason why that's going to be important with identification cards is because birth certificates in most states have to have a returned email address to send documents. Can't do that now, but we will be able to if I can get this through. So we'll be able to get confirmed documents that can help with getting real license. But it's been a complication for many years. It was a complication before I even started in 2016 here. But it's not unique to the state of Nevada. It's a very complicated system, and I truly believe what we have now is the best, but it can be improved. I just don't want to see it going away.
Thank you. Well, there you go. Now I understand why it's been several years we've been trying to work on it. The Lovelock prison is in my district. Last time we checked, I know you spoke with Assemblywoman Hanson about it recently. I think it's a 45%. Their staffing levels are down 45%. And you had some ideas on turning that around. Could you share those with us a little bit?
James Aranda, for the record, I will share them because you asked, but it's not even out to the public yet. But what we're doing is we're going to be shutting down the Humboldt camp, and so that individuals don't lose the jobs. We're going to be bringing those correction officers and staff over to Lovelock to help with the crisis and the staffing over there. And we're going to be resending the offenders in that camp to other camps so we don't lose the fire district, NDF's training on them and the expansion of the program. The other thing that is going to be a big deal is another thing that's not really released yet is moving the youthful offenders out of Lovelock and moving them to Warm Springs where they closed. They said to me, Warm Springs, that's the facility in Carson City, should never have closed. It's where we have the most resources for individuals. Closing that and moving individuals out to the rural camps and rural facilities like Lovelock and Ely. To me, it was the worst thing that can be done. We got to get the individuals that need the most amount of resources back here in Carson City at the Warm Springs so that I can get the resources that I have here for them. And I truly believe that the youth population, the youthful offenders, up to 18 years old, the best place to move them is either going to be Las Vegas or Carson City, where my resources are, not Lovelock, where I have none. So I think that's going to be a really big deal with getting them back here to closer to their families, closer to the support, and closer to the resources. And it will also help Lovelock because it'll reduce the number of staff needed to operate the facility, which is going to be presented in March 6th.
Very good. I thank you for that and appreciate you looking out for Lovelock. And I appreciate as well, under very difficult circumstances, coming up with some very innovative ideas to try to take care of some difficult solutions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Of course. I think I saw Senator Stone down there with a question as well. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and Mr. Zarenda, it's great to see you, and thank you for you and your staff for being here and giving us the presentation. You brought up the issue of aging infrastructure, and I'm following up on some of the answers that you gave to my colleague. Closing some facilities down, some you wish you hadn't closed. So tell me, in Nevada, is there a capacity issue based on the number of beds that you've got? Now, we have a growing population here in Nevada. And what is your capital improvement plan to address growing populations of people that need to be in our correctional system in the future, say the next 5 years?
So James Arnott, for the record, and you're exactly right that the JFA that the state contracts out with is showing that our population numbers are going to increase, increasing nationally and going to increase in this agency. Right now, there is no capacity problem. We actually, thank God, we have room. So it's going to help with our staffing crisis, but we have to be prepared for that when it's coming up because it will. That's why the infrastructure is going to be a very important thing for me. Right now, in prisons, you should not be able to have offenders behind their cell doors that can pop and open their doors. That happens now. That's infrastructure problem. When you have high security offenders can pop open their doors from inside their cells, and what happens is depends on the type of cell door it is. Most of our doors that run slide, well, those slides over years and years wear down. Well, now you have gaps that you can actually lift up the doors, pop them open, and come out. That's like obscene to me with the Department of Correction. That should never happen. That's just years and years of neglect that was not replaced. It's not an easy fix because those companies that built those motors and doors in there don't exist anymore. So all this has to be customized for replacements, and that's very expensive, but it's necessary. When you have facilities like Southern Desert and High Desert that were built on a side of a mountain, and you didn't plan on the erosion and the waters that come down from that mountain that erode underneath the fences. The way they built those fences down there, where they did them like you do at your house. You have a post that you cement into the ground, you connect a bar on the bottom to each of the posts. Well, what happens when the erosion happens underneath? Maybe not a problem at our house, but at a facility, it's a pretty big deal. So those fences have to be redone, doors have to be redone, our gates, if you go up to Lovelock, half the gates don't work up there. Well, if you have gates and locks, they're meant to lock and gate. Then they don't. Very dangerous and not a good situation for us. Those have to be looked at, and it has to be part of our capital improvement to bring us to standards where we know that we're going to be safe and we're not going to worry about someone getting out of a cell to attack somebody when it should never happen. Infrastructure is a big deal, and I think it's about time that the state really starts focusing on it.
Having served in a western neighborly state, as you know, they reach capacity in their prison system. In fact, in some county facilities, and the federal government got involved and basically forced the state to release prisoners. So that's why I was asking you what our capacity is, and I'm hoping as I become more experienced in Nevada that we see a robust capital improvement plan, while at the same time hoping that we see a decreased recidivism rate. The next question, if I may, Chair, tell me a little bit about some of our apprenticeship programs in Nevada, partnerships with colleges. Are they robust enough? Do they need to be more robust? Because obviously we want to train these individuals to come out and be productive members of society.
James Arenda, for the record, no, we're not where we should be. We should be focusing more on the colleges and helping. Another thing, it's kind of premature to say until I get my bill approved, but it's the wireless devices. Part of the government's Pell Grants is going to allow me to start doing secondary education on the tablets, or what I'll call them wireless devices because they're not tablets. It'll also start allowing us to do, every offender will have the opportunity to get some graduate education diploma or equivalency diploma that we cannot reach every individual right now. This is going to be a game changer for us, and a lot of it is going to be connected to those resources to be able to do training better, to be able to do education, which has to be a focus, because education really is the prime for having more sustainable jobs, to getting them higher. It's proven through the educational system, higher education, you got better opportunities for more sustaining jobs, and I think that has to be one of our goals as well.
Just two more quick questions. In the neighboring state, we also had a program that allowed our inmates to participate in service dog trainings. And it not only was great because we got more service dogs out into the community, but it had a calming effect on some of the violent criminals. And I was wondering if you had any programs like that in Nevada. And my last question, you can answer them both together. What is the contemporary cost today, all services, everything involved, to house a prisoner every single day in the Nevada correctional system?
James Renner, for the record, I'll answer the first half because the second one I don't have the exact number, but one of my staff might. So the service dogs, we don't do service dogs, but we still do pups on parole, and it actually went down less when COVID, which I'm sorry, I'm bringing it all back. I've already met with the Humane Society. I'm bringing the numbers back. I know the personal effects that it did. Every agency I've worked with along the country, whether it was New York City, New York State, whether it was Connecticut, those systems have proven that the having some type of dog, cat, welfare animal actually does reduce violence because it becomes part of their. It's a how do you put it? It's a worth of a value to the offender. It becomes their family, and you take them away from them, it's devastating. And actually, we had in Connecticut, when we would have to put individuals to mental health services if something happens to their dog, because it really is their life, and you got to worry about that. I started my own animal rescue organization back in 1990, Animal Angels Rescue Foundation. I know how important it is to be able to teach individuals the right about animals, about how you treat them, because it all comes back to our lifestyle on how we treat animals is also how we're going to be treating people, and that it's important for them to understand the importance of not only treatment but also spay and neutering. But it is a big deal to me too. But your question, I'll see if my coworker here has anything on the cost, which I don't have in front of me.
Chair, through you to the Senator. Kirk Widmar, for the record, I'm the Chief of the Offender Management Division. The price varies by custody level based on the services provided. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, and so I'll be happy to get those numbers for you, breaking it down by maximum custody, medium custody, minimum custody, and community trustee, so you have that information.
All right, I think we have a few more questions. Senator Don Darrow Loop.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to go back to the program discussion and ask you, what programs are you using?
James Arenda for the record. So I have a new but previous program director, that's Harold Wickham. And what we're going to do that'll help with being able to show this through the public so it's transparent is we're doing compendiums at each location, because wherever the program is, it could be different programs that depend on where you're housed. But the most important programs in that compendium will tell you at each facility what is actually the program that they're offering there, what the focus is, the goal is, and the numbers that are able to, and the weeks that it takes for the program. But when we talk about what I was talking about with violence, MRT and DBT are the two nationally used evidence-based programs that shown that they have, it's not even 51%, it's like 80% of those that go through the programs actually changes their behavior to the better. So my focus is first of all, is the violent programs to increase our MRT, which actually we can do a lot of it onto these wireless devices. Having those programs, substance use disorder programs is a big deal with the corrections, because the majority of our offenders have some type of substance use disorder that is related to their crime, even if they weren't arrested to it. Substance use disorder, we utilize our clinicians and our substance use disorder staff that are trained in doing those evidence-based programs for drugs and alcohol and opioids, which is a big deal. The other program that's really important to me is the mental health programming. This is where we're severely lacked in. We are not proficient in mental health programming because we do not have the mental health staff that I can get to every single location. Another one that has to be a goal of the state and a goal of mine to be able to increase our mental health services, because to me, it's severely lacking. And the evidence-based programs for those that are mentally ill is really just being treated with psychotropic meds, which shouldn't be our only focus.
So are those programs all in the same line, if you will, like Hope for Prisoners, MRT, whatever you've mentioned? So those programs would all be equal outcomes or equal type programs? It's just whatever works with that inmate? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, James Renner for the record, you are correct. That really comes to the basic of it. You're correct.
Okay. And one more question, Madam Chair. So I've asked you this question before about education. As an educator, I know education is one of the important pieces for our prisoners. What made the difference between now being able to use iPad-related devices and use them for education versus maybe, I don't know, 6-8 years ago? I think you and I had a conversation at one time. So what's the difference? Where did we change the idea that, oh, wait a minute, maybe we can use these?
James Renner for the record, I think a lot of this, where I can explain when I go over the bill of the wireless devices, is the what other states are doing and how what their outcome is. Right now, when you talk about education, it's not offered to everybody, and when it is offered, they're in waiting lists. That should never happen. That's why I think when you have wireless devices, just like we've learned from COVID, you can reach a lot more individuals off-site, and I think that's going to be my key to be able to get it to more offenders quickly, especially when you're talking about the Pell Grants to be offered as secondary education courses. You don't have to have somebody present. And when you do have physical school, like we do with our youthful offender units, all the homework, all the tests can all be done on those wireless devices. And also, what's important with them is those wireless devices have the capability to save things permanently. So when the offender does get discharged to the community or goes to parole, they actually can still have all that to their access. They just, once they leave, they can't get it back in. But when they're in the community, they can have it, which is another reason is going to be important for even Medicaid services and veteran services, because we could do all that the applications and everything while they're here on the wireless devices, save it, so that when they are released, all those services and all those applications and job applications and resumes are all saved. They can actually be transferred out to anyone they want.
So I agree with everything you said. The important piece there to me as an educator is that we have devices which can be in-house internet so that it doesn't go out, they can't search. It's important for them to have product, whatever it is, and there's lots of product out there, on those devices for them to better their literacy levels, better their math levels, better their science levels, find things that they're interested in, not just applying for a job somewhere. They're, in my opinion, while I recognize that we may be short teachers and we may have some staffing problems with education, there are a lot of online classes now that we can circumvent and silo into their own internet system so that they can be in a class with a teacher from several different institutions. And I'd be happy to have a further conversation about that. I'm sure you have experts, but my head explodes frequently when I think about prisoners sitting in their cells all day long doing nothing when we could be giving them this service easily. So that's my soapbox for the day. Thank you.
And James Renner, for the record, you're reading my mind exactly. And it's not Wi-Fi or internet, it's called LTE, so it doesn't go directly out. It's not like your own tablet. It's also going to connect faith-based services. We can actually do live services from the community that can actually go into every offender cell that wants to listen or be a part of that service. So there's a huge array of this, and I think we're just so far behind the times, it just takes us to be able to bring it to light, and then we'll see the benefits.
Are there any other questions? Okay, go ahead, Senator Orenshaw.
Thank you very much, Chair. When you have time, Director, could you provide the Chair and members of the committee with the number of inmates who have been granted parole but are still housed at NDOC, maybe because the parole plan is not complete or there's an issue? Be interested in that number.
James Renner, for the record, we can get that. I don't want to give you a number off my head. We also have part of that, the returns from 2022 of the returns from parole. That could be added in it too. So you see the numbers over a course of 12 months that have been returned. We have it listed under those with charges and those that are just technical violations. So that's all part of it. So that'll affect the results that you're looking for too, is of who's actually still in there that can go out. That can go to parole, that are just waiting to go, and that'll help, but we can get that.
Thank you very much. And Chair, would you indulge me with one additional question? I was excited to hear what you just said about the children at Lovelock being moved to a separate facility that will not have any adult inmates there. I wondered if right now you could tell me how many children currently are at the Lovelock facility, and also, for years I've heard talk about trying to have one NDOC facility that would be for young people, that would not be the normal general population with folks serving very long sentences, that would be more focused on education and rehabilitation. Do you see that perhaps in the future? 'Cause I've heard it talked about for years, but I never made that step, and I just wondered if that's something that might be part of your goals.
James Renner, for the record. So yesterday we had 17, today we have 16. One that just turned of age to be moved out. But the way I want this set up now, and that's why it'd be great if we can have legislators tour the Warm Springs. Right when you walk into the facility, there's called what's Unit 1. Unit 1 is split up into 2 different hallways. It's all connected to its own services. It's classrooms. There's a library, a program room. There's a chapel. All this is all connected just to those 2 corridors. Has its own recreation yard. So it's going to be run like a youthful juvenile facility. And what I want to do is be able to get those juvenile services there that I couldn't get up at Lovelock. And I truly believe it's going to be the closest to the best we can do, that once we get this whole thing set up, which will be completely separate, like you said, from even the male population. Even the staff will be able to get the culture and training that is different for the youth population than it is with the adult population.
I'm excited to hear that. Thank you, Director. Thank you, Chair.
Madam Chair, at least two of us on this committee have been to the Warm Springs facility.
Thank you. I just asked our policy analyst to follow up and plan that tour for the rest of us. And I think those are all the questions from the committee members. I know we've had you in the hot seat for almost an hour. And so there's just one question I want to ask, or one issue I want to touch on, which is visitation. Because you did talk about how important it is for families to be involved in the rehabilitation process and preparing people to re-enter society outside of being incarcerated. And so over the last 4 years, we have had, a lot of hearings, a lot of presentations, a lot of conversations about different changes to the visitation rules, to visitation eligibility, and the ways that people who are incarcerated are able to communicate with their families. And I was hoping that you could just talk to us very generally about how you view visitation and what we can expect to see under your leadership at NDOC facilities.
James Renner, for the record, you just spoiled a surprise for that I was going to give everybody. So we're getting we have an RFP going out right now that is actually going to probably be awarded by the end of the month. That's going to actually allow video visiting as well for everybody. And it's not going to replace personal visits. It'll just be able to allow visits for someone that can't make it to a facility, those that are from other countries that can't see their kids. It's all going to be connected through virtual and through video. There's going to be video that's going to be in our visiting rooms that can connect to confidential, so they can have attorney visits right there at every facility. Inside housing units, they can connect their wireless devices right into a kiosk into the wall, and they can actually do a video visiting with anyone from around the world. This is going to be offered for everybody, so it's going to be something that's going to connect when you can't get there. So I think that's going to be a big game changer with those that can never get. I mean, especially like the youth population, those from Vegas that can't get the Lovelock. It'll still be able to have at least a visual. They could still see their children. They could still see anyone that's the support from their communities can actually be done in video. But they still could come live, but we understand that, probably the majority of those that can't even afford it, can't even get out to those facilities no matter what they do. This will allow that communication. So it's going to be a big game changer as well. Big things coming up in the next 12 months.
All right. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate you taking the time just to come and present to us and reintroduce yourself and answer all of our questions. We very, very much appreciate it. I know that you do have legislation coming up, so we will welcome you back to the Senate Judiciary Committee when that time comes. And today we just want to thank you for your presentation. And so now we'll move to testimony in support of NDOC. No, I'm kidding. We will move to the next item on our agenda, and that is a presentation from the Department of Indigent Defense Services, one of the newest departments in the state of Nevada. We're very lucky to be joined by their director, and I will let both of our presenters introduce themselves.
Good morning, Chair, members of this committee, or good afternoon, sorry. My name is Marcy Reba, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Department of Indigent Defense Services, and that is a really long name for public defender stuff. So that's, if you're wondering what we're doing, that is what our focus is on. With me today is Deputy Director Thomas Qualls, so we will be sharing this presentation. And since we were created in 2019, and 2021, there was a COVID pandemic, we haven't really had that opportunity to come in, introduce ourselves, and let you know what we're doing. So we're hoping to take that opportunity now. We've provided all of you with a copy of our PowerPoint, which has our vision, mission, and goals, which you can read on your own time. And during this PowerPoint, we'll be letting you know who we are, why we're here, what we're doing, and we're hoping that when you look at that, you take into consideration that we are a department of 7 people. So there's myself, 2 deputy directors, 2 management analysts, and 2 administrative staff. We sit under the Board on Indigent Defense Services, and we also provide oversight for the Nevada State Public Defender. So why were we created? 1963, almost 60 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court held that the 6th Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the right to competent counsel to be provided to those that cannot afford it if you're charged with a crime. In the 70s, Nevada was a leader in indigent defense. We had created the Clark County Public Defender's Office. We'd created the Washoe County Public Defender's Office. And for all of our rural counties, we created the Nevada State Public Defender. And the funding for the State Public Defender at that time was mainly by the state. The counties paid a small portion. Over time, that funding structure flipped a little bit, and pretty soon the counties were paying for everything that they had to pay for. And the state would cover things that were specifically states. So the county said, I can do this cheaper. I can provide a better service, and we can do this on our own. So many of the counties either decided in the rurals, we're going to form a county office, or some decided, let's contract with independent attorneys and ask them to provide indigent defense services. And that brings us to 2018. The ACLU filed a lawsuit against the state of Nevada, and they said that the state was not providing adequate indigent defense representation in certain rural counties. And the rural counties that they named were Churchill, Douglas, Esmeralda, Eureka, Lander, Lincoln, Lyon, Mineral, Nye, and White Pine. And what all those counties have in common is they relied on those independent contract attorneys to provide the services. It was not an organized office. It was not a county office. It was not the state office. It was individual attorneys. So in response, the legislature in 2019 created our department, and we are in NRS 180, what we're required to do. And shortly thereafter, in 2020, the state of Nevada entered into a stipulated consent judgment, which required us to achieve certain conditions, and many of these are contained in NRS 180 as well. And we do have a link, a hyperlink to that stipulated consent judgment. So what do we do? What programs do we administer? Many of you, I know, are lawyers and have practiced in Clark County. So similar to Drew Christensen in Clark County, we provide counsel administrator services for the rural counties. Assembly Bill 480 passed in 2021, and the purpose behind that was to create separation from the judiciary and the independent defense function. Prior to that, the judiciary would appoint and select counsel, and they would also approve or deny billing and requests for experts and investigators. With the passage of Assembly Bill 480, our department has taken on those roles, and in the past year, we've selected counsel in over 2,000 cases. We have reviewed requests for expert fees in over 400 bills, and we've processed over 400 post-conviction bills. We've also started implementing those Davis stipulated consent judgment. We've started our attorney oversight because this is something that's specifically required. We've created a list of training requirements. These training requirements are already in place, or were already in place in Washoe County and Clark County, but nothing was in place in the rural counties. So we put together training and qualification requirements, and attorneys that want to practice in the rural counties had to apply for a list similar to Washoe and Clark. And at present, we have 110 qualified attorneys on that list. We've created a complaint and recommendation ability for people to provide complaints and recommendations to us if they're unhappy with their service or they have ways that they think indigent defense could be improved. We also are required to provide a systematic review of public defense on an annual basis. And at this point, with the three of us, we're basically doing that virtually. We don't have sufficient staff to be going court to court and watching court, but one day we hope that will happen. We are required to collect data in the stipulated consent judgment, as well as those requirements of NRS 180. And over the period of COVID, we rolled out a case management system. We built it. We provide it free of charge to all indigent defense service providers. And in there, we collect data on their caseloads, their time that they're spending on the cases, whether they're hiring experts and the amount of time that's spent. And we use this data to prepare and publish quarterly and annual data reports. We also provide attorney training. We are going to be holding our third annual conference this year in May in Reno, May 4th and 5th. It's free of charge for all indigent defense providers. And we also provide monthly, or we try to do monthly free training virtually for our attorneys. Another big thing that we've achieved is the maximum county contribution facilitation. The legislature asked our board to create a formula to determine the most that each county pays for indigent defense services. So it's no longer the county pays 100%. Right now, it's like a high deductible health care plan. Once a county reaches a certain amount, anything over and above that, they can request reimbursement for the state. So this past year, we had to go to IFC, but we were able to get over $1.9 million for our rural counties, and that was reimbursed by the state. We have created an indigent defense oversight function where we review indigent defense services in those 15 counties. We work with those counties to develop their plans to avoid corrective action. And we go to inspect courtrooms, courthouses, indigent defense facilities, make sure they have a place to meet with their clients. And one day we hope to more often observe what's going on in court. Want to take over? Sure. And I'll switch the next to Tom.
Thank you, Chair, committee members. My name is Tom Qualls, for the record, Qualls. Some additional things that we are in charge of is we're charged with developing a pipeline to the rurals. So we're working in a number of different avenues to do this, including working with the Boyd School of Law to develop interns and extern programs. Over the last 2 years, we received grant funding to place 2 different externs from the law school in county public defender offices, where they're given actual hands-on trial experience, as well as a $6,500 stipend to cover housing and expenses. We're providing scholarships for those externs, as I mentioned, and we also host interns and externs in our office. We do grants application and management in our office to supplement our budget, and we facilitate those in-house. We serve as the secretary for the Board on Indigent Defense Services, maintain our department's website, and are charged with building our department's budget. By the way, all of those 3 things we do as lawyers, not really trained in that world. Despite the sort of tight budget and small staff, and the fact that almost our whole existence has been during the pandemic, I think we've achieved great success. Some examples of our fiscal year 22 achievements are that we now have plans for the provision of indigent defense services in every county in Nevada. Up until last year, there were only Washoe and Clark that had these. We worked diligently in team building with county management and with indigent defense providers in each of the 15 rural counties to develop these plans, which are also dynamic. In our oversight function, we're continually sort of adjusting and amending these plans to suit the counties, and with our end goal of creating sustainable and effective systems. Fiscal reporting and reimbursement requests, as Ms. Reba discussed, under the reimbursement formula that was passed, we were able to facilitate over $1.9 million in reimbursements to both Davis and non-Davis counties last fiscal year. We oversaw the implementation of AB 480, which created much-needed independence for public defenders from the judiciary to put them on an even playing field with prosecutors. We've continued our regular training and development of resources for all indigent providers in the state. As Ms. Reba discussed, we rolled out the legal server case management system, and for the first time in Nevada's history, we now have a year's worth of data on case numbers and case types and workloads for each of these counties. We also drafted and saw the passing of permanent regulations for the Board on Indigent Defense Services effective October 5th. Chris Arabia was going to be with us today, but he's actually in court. He is our brand-new Nevada State Public Defender who oversees all of the State Public Defender's Office across the state, which very soon will include White Pine County, who has opted in for all indigent defense services. The State Public Defender is additionally going to be providing death penalty representation for Churchill, Humboldt, and Lander County, appellate representation for Esmeralda, Humboldt, Lander, and Lincoln, and pardons and parole representation for Churchill, Esmeralda, and Humboldt. And we were working on other programs, including a complex litigation unit, which would cover not just death penalty cases, but other complicated matters for the rural counties. I wanted to note again that all of those accomplishments basically were fulfilled mostly under the restrictions of the pandemic. We have a monitor, which is court appointed in the Davis lawsuit to ensure that we are complying with all of the requirements on a timely basis. She produces quarterly reports, and most of those reports recount all of the compliance that the department has done, again, especially with our small staff and tight budget. The monitor does, however, consistently point to a number of things, and we've pulled out 3 of those from her most recent report that also cited the governor's budget and her concerns over that. So the first one is that the monitor is concerned that there is an insufficient department budget for oversight and other functions. As Ms. Reba noted, we are in charge with oversight of all of these rural indigent defense systems, including under the Davis lawsuit, on the ground, on-site review of court and the systems in each of these counties. With only 3 directors and with all of the other policy stuff that we do, this is a really onerous requirement. So Ms. Reba and I were successful last year in visiting every one of the counties, and again, in doing team building there and working on their indigent defense plans and overseeing court to the extent that we can. It's impossible for us to be in all of these places and do the kind of systemic, regular reviews that we need to in these courtrooms, and make sure that, the attorneys and clients have private spaces to meet, make sure that initial appearances are being, that attorneys are attending these, that they're asking and making the kinds of arguments that they need to be making. And so the monitor's concern is that we need additional policy analysts to be out in the field and to be our eyes and ears to be fully compliant with there. And so she recommends more staff, more oversight positions, and more funding in that area. There's also the workload. This goes to, and the insufficient number of qualified attorneys. There is a shortage of qualified indigent defense lawyers in Nevada. This is not actually unique to Nevada. This is a problem that several states are experiencing right now, and they're addressing it in a number of different ways. A lot of the reasons for the shortages are inadequate pay and unsustainable workloads. And so those are issues that we are actively working to address. We've actually contracted with the National Center for State Courts, and their job is to create a workload study. We have collected data, as we mentioned, through our legal server case management system, and they have collected additional data through intensive Delphi studies, interviews essentially with practitioners on the ground in different areas of practice. What we're waiting on right now is that the last national workload standard that we have is from the ABA from the 1970s. It's almost 50 years old. And so the RAND Corporation over the last couple of years has undergone a very thorough nationwide study. The study, we understand, is complete, but it's undergoing peer review right now. And so we're just waiting on that study to kind of supplement and reference our own statewide study. Once that comes out, and the preliminary indications are there are going to be significant increases needed in the number of attorneys in all of these rural counties. Some of them literally double the numbers that will be there. Again, we don't have the final numbers, and so I don't want to cite those officially right now. But the monitor has been following this, and she's been meeting with NCSC as well. And so she's concerned that the rurals are struggling right now to recruit and retain attorneys under these circumstances. Right now, the Nevada State Public Defender's Office is actually 33% down in its attorney available positions. Again, this has to do with inadequate salaries, the inability to compete with other counties and municipalities, not to mention private industry. And one of the things that I'll mention here as well is that under the Davis settlement and consent judgment and under our regulations, we're required to achieve parity with prosecutors in the relevant jurisdictions, which makes sense, right? It's supposed to be an even playing field. So you've got a prosecutor, you've got a public defender. The salaries should be same, the resources should be same, the experts, the investigators, whatever. So you have the actual level playing field that is anticipated in our justice system. And Ms. Reba can correct me if I'm wrong, but just an example, the assistant, and just to use Carson City as an example, the assistant district attorney in Carson City makes $180,000 a year. The head of the NSPD makes around $130,000 right now. So that's the disparity in the state versus the county system, but also we see similar systems within counties where public defenders are just paid less. So this is something that we're actively working to fix, and we hope that the legislature adds some assistance there. The final thing that I will address is the monitor's concerns about the process for the maximum contribution funding. Essentially, the monitor would like for that money to all be in our budget because it makes for a much more efficient and effective system that way. Right now, the counties present quarterly financial reports to us, and when they exceed their maximum contribution spending, then we have to take those funds and go through the governor's finance office and then go to IFC to request those funds, and then that has to be processed. And then if they're approved, the counties get reimbursed, and there's a 2 or 3 month lag time there, but it takes up, legislators' time, it takes up our time and resources, and it kind of puts the counties in some financial jeopardy. It'd be much more effective if we just had that money in our budget. And then there's also still, even though we reimbursed $1.9 million this last term, there's a little bit of distrust still that we are working to continue to build between the counties and the state. The counties don't still 100% believe that the state's going to make good on their money. And if we don't have that money, or on the promise for reimbursement, if we don't have that money in our department's budget, we can't say, if you show us the proper documentation, we will reimburse you, because there's a third party involved. So we can just say, here's the process, and it should go according to plan, but we don't know. So for all of those reasons, the monitor would like to see that money actually in the department's budget. And now I think we'll entertain any questions on that before we get into the SB 39.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the members of the committee? All right. And before do you need a second? I have a question, and excuse me. You don't have to address me. You could go directly to the members who ask you questions. Is there one standard rate that attorneys are paid for taking on these indigent defense cases?
Tom Qualls for the record. The short answer, Chair, is no, there's not a standard rate. Each county has the ability to create their own plans, their own systems. Some counties have county public defender offices, and then they set the salaries with that. Certain counties, like Elko, actually have a collective bargaining agreement through which that happens. Certainly Clark and Washoe, of course, have those. Other counties do independent contractors, hire independent contractors to serve as their public defenders, and the amounts of those contracts vary greatly across the counties. The one thing that is standard is in NRS 7125, there is a statutory rate for sort of the independent one-off appointed conflict counsel, and that's $100 an hour currently. There's going to be a bill that comes forward later where we're working to increase that amount. That amount hasn't increased since 2003, and we hired a data analyst to look at that, and one of his conclusions was essentially that $100 in 2003 is about $163 in 2003. And so for that reason alone, that rate probably needs to go up. The same data analyst put out a statewide survey on overhead costs, and a lot of the feedback was we can't continue to take these appointed cases at $100 an hour because it just doesn't even cover our overhead.
That makes sense. Thank you so much. Vice Chair Harris, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you talk a little bit about the process that you all have in place to budget for this maximum county contribution and plans to ensure that we no longer will have to be coming to IFC in order to ask for the funds? Is there something in place to get a better estimate and put it in the budget?
Thank you, Vice Chair Harris. Marcy Reba for the record. So the maximum contribution formula is contained in our administrative code. And in short, it's basically what they spent in fiscal year 18 and 19 averaged out with inflation. So we know what the base point is, but we always have to add inflation. So every year on May 1st, counties have to tell us what their budget is for indigent defense services. We take that budget, we subtract what their maximum payment is, and that's what we put together as the amount that we think we need for each county. And we add all of that together, and we've presented that. My understanding is that moving forward, there will be 2 one-shots in the governor's finance office budget to set aside over, I think, approximately $3.9 million for the maximum contribution formula. It will not be within the department budget, but instead it'd be within the finance office budget.
Are you aware of the process by which the funds would move from the finance office to your budget in the event that you need to draw from it?
Thank you, Vice Chair Harris. Marcy Reba for the record. That part hasn't necessarily been cleared up. I know that the director of the governor's finance office is the secretary for the Board of Examiners, so we may have to do a request to the Board of Examiners. But one concern brought up by the monitor was that there's a prosecutor on the Board of Examiners, so that we would no longer have that independence from the prosecution. We're supposed to have this independence from judiciary, prosecution, and the prosecutor, the attorney general would have say whether or not these counties were reimbursed. So that was part of the monitor's concern by going to the Board of Examiners. But otherwise, I'm not quite sure what the process will be. I'm presuming that we will have to go in front of the Board of Examiners to request it, though.
All right. And sometimes, often, even once you get approval from the Board of Examiners, it still comes to us to then approve the actual transfer. So I don't know who developed that plan, but I'm hoping they come up with another one. Just going to throw that out there. This isn't the finance committee, but it seems like we could get a line item in your budget that reverts back if the funds aren't used, and that would be a bit cleaner and achieve what we're looking for, because I think we don't want to have to keep an IFCs granting this money, and there's not much difference for us if we have to approve it from the Board of Examiners or through the, similar IFC process. So I'll leave it at that, but please reply if
And
you'd
Chair,
like.
if I could just add one to Vice Chair Harris's point, Marcy Reba, for the record, the Office of the State Public Defender has over $1 million in it to reimburse post-conviction billing. So we have those funds to quickly reimburse that funding. So I think it could be something similar to that.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from members? Okay, go ahead, Senator Stone.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. You mentioned the shortage of public defenders, and I think part of the reason that you're alluding to is because they're being paid at 2003 levels instead of 2023 levels. So are you working with any of the Nevada law schools to recruit defense attorneys? Is there any incentives that you can get to allow them to come into rural areas?
Thank you, Senator. Marcy Reba, for the record. Yes, we are working with Boyd School of Law. We are required to work with them to develop a pipeline to bring our attorneys into the rural areas. However, we don't have any funding in our budget to pay for any of these pipelines. Mm-hmm. We did go out and obtain a grant from the State Bar of Nevada for that stipend that Tom talked about, where we received approximately $26,000. The first year of that stipend was last year, where we successfully placed 2 students. We have 1 more year for this upcoming summer, and after that point, from the State Bar, those funds will expire. The state entity is no longer allowed to apply for those grant funds through the state. You're required to be a nonprofit. But we are working with Boyd School of Law. They have received an endowment, and we are hoping that this could possibly be used to continue this program. It was a really great opportunity, and in fact, on Wednesday, I'll be traveling down to the law school. We'll be doing a lunch session with free pizza, and we'll be telling them about how great the rurals are, how many opportunities there are. Matt Pennell from Elko County will be there, Jacob Summer from Churchill County will be there, Chris Arabia from the Nevada State Public Defender will be there, as well as myself and Peter Handy, the deputy director, and we are going to try to encourage them to at least consider coming out and looking at the rural Nevada and consider moving there.
With the public defender shortage, is there any risk to the state of Nevada that you're not going to be in compliance with the ACLU settlement?
Tom Qualls, for the record. Let me just add to what Ms. Reba said regarding your first question. That is, we're also working with Boyd School of Law in a number of other ways, and we do student luncheons and other things to try to recruit people into this world. We are also in conversation with the State Bar right now to try to carve out maybe an indigent defense reciprocity exception to try to recruit from other states. Moving on to the potential danger of violating the Davis stipulated consent judgment. It's one of the reasons why we presented the Davis monitors concerns here, because right now the plaintiffs are quiet about our compliance, and so we don't really have any read on that. I would note that in the monitor's last report, she notes that the Sixth Amendment can be violated by structural or systemic inadequacies. We've had situations, because we're the appointed council administrator, we're aware of this in the various counties. Just recently in White Pine County, there was a double homicide that it took us a very long time to find a qualified lawyer that would accept the appointment. There is the very real possibility that this creates a public safety issue, because if there is not a qualified attorney to take these appointments, the charges have to be dismissed, essentially. And we're seeing that in a related realm related to competency issues and competency holds. There was talk from the NDOC director earlier about the crisis in mental health that I think we're all aware of. So there's some crossover there, and we're definitely at that flashpoint with indigent defense. We talk about a lot that, it's like squeezing the balloon. Some attorneys go over here and take these contracts and it leaves holes over here. So there just aren't sufficient numbers of people currently doing this work or coming into this work. The numbers from Boyd from last year were that there are only 6 graduates that went into any kind of public service law at all. So, I think the short answer to your question is yes. I feel like we are in that jeopardy.
I'm very intrigued with your idea of reciprocity, but maybe you can kind of educate me. The laws in other states are sometimes very different than Nevada. So if we did have some type of reciprocity, how would you tailor that so to ensure that we have competent legal counsel for our indigent populations in Nevada?
Sure, that's an excellent question. Tom Qualls for the record again, Chair. Indigent defense is different from a lot of other areas of law in the state-by-state practice. The reality is that most other states have some form of reciprocity with other states. So for instance, if a public defender has been practicing in Utah for 10 years and wants to come here and practice, we do have a limited 2-year carve out where they could work in an established office, but then eventually they'll have to take the bar. Again, as far as the concerns over learning the criminal statutes that are different here from Utah, that's a real concern. I suppose it's not as big of a concern as different areas of law. The federal Constitution is the federal Constitution, and that's, ultimately what you're upholding is Sixth Amendment rights, Fifth Amendment rights, Fourth Amendment rights, those kinds of things. The individual offenses and how many years that carries and all of that, everybody has to learn that anyway. But there could be some sort of conditional approval where they have to take X number of, criminal CLEs in order to, get past a probationary period or something of that matter.
As a former regional representative of the United States of Labor for the 10 Western United States was my last role prior to coming here. We work with Governor Ducey in Arizona about occupational licensing recognition. And it was a way to attract more physicians and more nurses and pharmacists. And the attorneys wanted to be excluded from that legislation. But what I'm hearing from you is that you can basically isolate defense attorneys as a part of reciprocity in trying to attract more of them to come into the state of Nevada. If that were happening here in Nevada, would you be inclined to support legislation like that?
So, you don't have to opine on hypothetical legislation. We appreciate that, you're here to give us an overview of the Indigent Defense, the Office of Indigent Defense, sorry. And we do appreciate, the policy conversation. So you don't have to tell us bills that you would support or oppose. And in fact, I think you guys have some ethical parameters on things that you are allowed to take positions on, given that you are, part of the state government. But did you have any other follow-up questions, Senator Stone? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. In that case, it looks like we've come to the end of our questions on the presentation. Thank you very much for presenting. I will close out this agenda item, but not excuse you just yet, because you are going to walk us now through a bill, and I will now open the bill hearing on SB 39. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Committee members, Marcy Reba for the record again. Today, we are excited to present to you Senate Bill 39. And in our presentation, we talked to you about how NRS 180 requires that we collect certain data, as well as the stipulated consent judgment requires that data collection. And with the change of Assembly Bill 480, we are now the council administrator for many of these counties. So we are collecting data that attorneys want to make sure that attorney-client privilege maintains privilege. So what we're presenting before you today is legislation that would provide that certain records received by our department keep that confidential, and they remain confidential under certain circumstances. So specifically, we are required to look at complaints. We want to make sure that if someone's making a complaint that they're not waiving their attorney-client privilege. We're required to investigate certain complaints. We're required to collect data. We're required to review and approve requests for experts and investigators. And our main concern is to make sure that that remains private and that it cannot be obtained by a public records request. So with that, I would answer any questions.
All right. Any questions? Vice Chair Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you just explain why complaints come to your office and not the bar?
Thank you, Vice Chair Harris. Marcy Reba for the record. We have a very limited ability to look at complaints. Under NRS 180, we were required to create a complaint and recommendation portal where individuals could provide complaints or recommendations regarding indigent defense services. So what we're receiving at this point in time is attorneys or clients are sometimes complaining about certain attorneys or other matters, but we just want to make sure that if anything is said in these complaints, that it remains privileged if it needs to be privileged.
Are those complaints forwarded to the bar? Because my understanding is you all don't have any authority to discipline or revoke someone's bar license, right? Is that right?
Vice Chair Harris, that is correct. Marcy Reba for the record, we do not have authority to revoke anyone's bar card, but we do have the ability to determine whether or not they should stay on our list. If we're hearing complaints of certain things that they're doing, and generally what we're going to do is we're going to offer them training to try and fix the certain issues. Mainly what we've received at this point is people saying my client or my attorney hasn't contacted me. So we'll reach out to the attorney, let them know that their client would like contact, and ask that they follow up with us. But just the purpose is to improve indigent defense services. But sometimes clients may say something in their complaint which should be protected, so we want to make sure that it isn't subject to a request.
And just one last question, Madam Chair, if I may. Would this bill prevent you from filing a complaint with the Nevada Bar if you felt warranted?
Thank you, Vice Chair Harris. Marcy Reba for the record. We do not believe so because in Section 1, subsection 3, it does allow the board or the department, if necessary, to forward any non-attorney-client privilege materials to the bar. So we would be able to forward anything we felt so long as it was not protected.
All right, I would just encourage as much coordination as possible since there are people who already do this. So I hope you aren't doing all of it in-house and just taking people off lists. If they need to be reported to the bar, please do so. Thanks.
Point of clarification, if I could, Chair. Tom Qualls for the record. We generally respond to the complainants with an explanation that we're not the bar and that their complaint to us does not take the place of a state bar complaint or a post-conviction habeas petition or anything of that matter. It's mostly designed to look at systemic problems so that we can address those.
I'm going to take the privilege to follow up here, and I'm going to guess that the majority of the complaints that you get are more along the lines of like, I couldn't get the deal that I wanted, I have to go to trial and I don't want to, my attorney doesn't answer my calls at 9 p.m. And so you guys get to, you filter out those complaints as opposed to complaints that actually come forward of, an offer was made in my case that was never conveyed to me by the attorney, which would be a serious ethical violation, or, my attorney didn't share important evidence with me that was provided by the prosecution in a timely fashion, and I thought that it didn't exist. Am I correct in my assessment of the types of complaints that you normally get?
I think the main type of complaint that we receive, Marcy Reber for the record, sorry, Chair, is just wanting to have contact with their attorney. And we're usually that little push that the attorneys need to say, hey, so-and-so has said that you haven't contacted them. Could you please call them? That's the main type of complaints that we've received. And that's not really the reasoning that we need this bill. The reason behind it is attorneys are sending us requests for experts and investigators. And before we can approve those requests, we need to know that it's reasonable and necessary for them to have that expert. So they do give us a little bit of information about the case so that we can decide, yes, this is reasonable and necessary, or no, we're not going to approve those fees. We just want to make sure that that thought that the attorney is putting in is not subject to some sort of public records request, or is not subject to any sort of disclosure, or that they are relaying it to us somehow violates the attorney-client privilege. So that is the main portion. Also, like we said, we are required to collect data. We've provided that legal service system. It does have client names in it, client birth dates, and some attorneys are using it to put client notes in. We have created a policy that we will not look into any sort of files, but because of the way Legal Server is set up, we would have access to it. We just choose not to look into it. And this would create that safety to say this is protected by that attorney-client privilege and not subject to any sort of disclosure, other than the information that is not protected, like workloads, time spent, et cetera.
Thank you so much. Are there other questions from members of the committee? All right, I am not seeing any questions, so thank you so much for your presentation. We'll move now to testimony in support of SB 39. Starting with anybody present in Carson City wishing to give testimony, please go ahead and make your way up to the table. I don't see anybody here at the table in Carson City or in Las Vegas, so we will go directly to the phone for anybody in support of SB 39.
Thank you, Chair. The public line is open and working. However, there are no callers to offer testimony at this time.
Thank you so much. In that case, we will move on to testimony in opposition. Again, I don't see anybody coming to the table in Carson City or Las Vegas. So unless someone called in real quick to give opposition testimony, I'm going to check with BPS to see if that happened. Do we have anybody to give opposition testimony on the phone?
No, Chair. There are no callers on the phone line right now.
Thank you so much. Okay, we are also going to call for neutral testimony, someone who has something to add that is important for us to know in making our decision, but does not have a preference on whether or not we pass this bill. I don't see anybody coming to the table in either Carson City or Las Vegas, so we will go back to our phone line one more time and see if there is anybody on the phone to give testimony in any position on SB 39.
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to offer testimony on SB 39, please press star 9 now to raise your hand and take your place in the queue.
Hi, this is Jim Hoffman, representing Nevada Attorneys for Criminal Justice. NACJ is in support of this measure. Specifically, the issue is that when an attorney submits a bill for an expert, that can reveal the tactics that they're intending to use at the trial, and they also might pursue a lead that doesn't pan out. That is also a kind of tactical information. And like Deputy Director Qualls said, it's important that defense and prosecution be on an equal footing. Prosecutors don't have to reveal their tactics until trial is approaching. Defense shouldn't be asked to either. So we believe this is a good bill that puts everyone on an equal footing, and we support it. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. BPS, is there anybody else on the phone to give testimony?
No, Chair, there are no other callers at this time.
All right, then that concludes our hearing on SB 39. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. And we will move next to our hearing on SB 67. I will invite the presenters up to the table to give us an overview of the bill whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel, Vice Chair Harris, and all members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. My name is Chris DeRico, and I'm the Chairman of the Board of Parole Commissioners. Also available today from the Parole Board is Kelly Mellinger, who is employed as our Hearings Examiner 2. Thank you for this opportunity to provide you with an overview of SB 67. This is Kelly's first time appearing before the legislature, and I would like to give her the opportunity to present this bill.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Kelly Mellinger. I'd like to start with historical background. In 2006, the federal Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act of 2006 was enacted to protect the public by establishing a comprehensive national system for the registration of sex offenders and offenders against children, which included, without limitation, the establishment of a uniform nationwide system for the registration of and community notification concerning such offenders. In furtherance of this purpose, the Act required each state to enact laws regarding the registration of and community notification concerning sex offenders and offenders convicted of a crime against a child which conform to the provisions of the Act. States which did not enact such laws by the date provided in the Act would not receive certain federal funds. In the 2007 legislative session, AB 579 was introduced and later approved on June 13th of 2007, which is now included in NRS 179D. The term sexual offender was specifically defined in AB 579, which is now a part of NRS 179D.097. The new changes to the laws regarding registration of sex offenders and offenders convicted of a crime had an effective date of July 1st of 2008, but were not implemented in Nevada until 2018 due to litigation. Because the law was enjoined when the definitions of sexual offenders were placed into NRS 213, those definitions did not refer to NRS 179D, but instead provided for the then current language contained in NRS 179D. Now that the Adam Walsh Act is unenjoined, we would like to clean this up and ensure that the same definition is being used throughout the statutes. We are requesting that this request be reviewed and are hopeful that you will determine that for the term sexual offense, we may rely on this term as stated in NRS 179D.097. The issue is that there are other statutes within NRS 213 that have differing definitions of sexual offense, and they do not all coincide. For example, there is a definition in NRS 213.1078 and another in NRS 213.1214.6D. This bill revises the definition of sexual offense for the purpose relating to parole to make the definition consistent with the definition in the term used elsewhere in the NRS. Passage of this bill should provide greater clarity with regard to this definition, specifically as it relates to NRS 213. If any of you have any questions regarding this bill, we will do our best to provide an answer or provide you with follow-up information if necessary.
All right, thank you. Questions on this bill? I am not seeing any. I do have one question. It looks to me like one of the primary changes that this would make in practice is removing the inclusion in the definition of sexual offense for purposes of parole and probation, removing offenses that were found to be sexually motivated. Is that part of the intent here?
Chris DeRico for the record. So it might be easy if I break it down a little bit by section for you. For section 1 of the bill is actually that the definitions that we're looking to have put in there 179D097. So the new definition and striking what is in there now that is outdated and as a part of 213. As a part of section 2 of the bill, really when this was drawn up, the language already says in there, NRS 179D.097, that's already in effect right now, and then it was just recommended that use the term a sexual offense in there, so it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It means the same thing if this were to pass. When you get specifically to section number 3 of the bill, this only talks about the Nevada Department of Corrections and their sex offender assessment that they are required to conduct statutorily, that is mandated. And as a part of that, which is contained in NRS 213.1214, in there's a definition of sex offender and there's a definition of sexual offense. But if this 179D definition is used, we don't need that definition. We're trying to clean it up so we have one definition of sexual offense all throughout Chapter 213. Once again, this is only for the prisons and them having to do an additional sex offender assessment on certain qualified individuals convicted of a sex offense. So it's not doing anything once they get out on the street or anything of that nature. It's just, do you qualify for this additional assessment or do you not? So it's providing that clarification in 213. Section 4 of the bill, once again, 179D.097 is in there, requested change to move it because if the new definition passes. Section 5 of the bill, in there, it has to do with lifetime supervision, which is much different than parole. And I got to say, LCD staff was outstanding making this catch in here because the addition in the language there in what they list as subsection 16 actually gives greater clarification to determine which offenses qualify under lifetime supervision after they've completed a custodial sentence or probation or anything of that nature, because you can be convicted of a sex offense and not have to be on lifetime supervision. So I'd like to say I had to put that in there. LCB caught that, and I thought it was fantastic. So, and then once again, subsection, and I think that's really it. So it doesn't make any changes to anybody under supervision or anything else. 179D.097, just for way of a little bit of history, that is all of the offenses that the legislature has deemed and that the state sex offender registry says must register as a sex offender. So they are the sexual offenses that we already have adopted. And so if they must register as a sex offender, according to the state sex offender registry, and what we've included in NRS 213.1214, we should also have those sex offender assessments to make better informed decisions and capture all of those crimes that we know are already mandated to register as a sex offender. So we're really cleaning this up so that all of 213 will be on the same page. Everybody knows exactly what's expected with regard to that definition.
Thank you. I think that answers my question. Other questions? All right, I don't see any other questions, so we appreciate your presentation and your explanations. We will move now to testimony in support of SB 67. Starting here in Carson City or Las Vegas. I don't see anybody coming to the table in Las Vegas or in Carson City. BPS, is there anybody on the phone?
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to testify in support of SB 67, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Thank you, Chair. There are no callers wishing to testify in support at this time.
All right, then we'll move on to testimony in opposition to SB 67. I do see some individuals coming up to the table in Carson City, so we will start with you. You will each have 2 minutes. Just give us your name, please, when you begin and spell it for the record. That will not be deducted from your 2 minutes. And whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Piro from the Clark County Public Defender's Office, JOHNPIRO. We are in opposition because the language in this bill, we believe, is too broad. We definitely agree with Chair DeRico that our statutes are confusing, not just for the parole board, not just for those charged or those victimized, but for all of the actors in the criminal justice system trying to apply these laws. Although the intent of this bill is a cleanup bill, in writing, if enacted, it will have far-ranging impacts beyond just cleaning up. For example, 179D.097 broadens the list so much that it sweeps almost everything into lifetime supervision. So there may be people that were just on the registry that are off the registry already, and they may be swept back into lifetime supervision. Arguably, that is one of the consequences of this bill. Stopping sexual assaults and proper punishments for the offenders are one of the greatest challenges of our time. And I think that it's probably time for an overhaul and a study of our laws and crimes of this nature that's taken thoughtfully, carefully, and evidence-based. Roping everything into the broadest definition of Nevada law seems like Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart's quote on obscenity in 1964, "I'll know it when I see it." It's a little bit different now. The world has moved on. The Raider fan peeing in public after a game charged with lewd conduct should be treated differently than the mentally ill person exposing themselves to traffic should be treated differently than the offender actually sexually assaulting a child or another person. So because of these unintended consequences, we are in opposition.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Erica Roth. That's ERICAROTH, and I'm here on behalf of the Washoe County Public Defender's Office to testify in opposition. I echo much of the sentiment of the Clark County Public Defender's Office, and I don't want to reiterate everything that Mr. Piro said. A few points that I want to really dig into on this is when we're talking about who is going to be subject to lifetime supervision, what does that actually mean? It will limit where people can live. It will limit what kind of jobs that they can have. And this does also risk impacting juvenile justice offenders. And so if we have an individual who is convicted of statutory sexual seduction as a minor, changing the definition of sexual offense to the broadest possible definition risks bringing in somebody who has that conviction as a juvenile and will still have to register for life, significantly limiting what that trajectory will look like. And so there's a reason that there are different definitions of sexual related crimes or sexual offenses in regards to parole and probation or lifetime supervision, because not all crimes are created equally. And we need to take the opportunity to dig in because I agree, this is confusing. We have cases pending on appeal where parties were in disagreement about what was or was not required to be lifetime supervision. A clarification, I think, is necessary and is the responsible thing to do, but simply choosing the broadest possible term, it's going to have unintended consequences. And for that reason, we do oppose the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else in Carson City or Las Vegas, so we will go to the phone for anybody else to. Come on back. All right. So we do not necessarily allow questions for people who are testifying and not presenting bills. If it's okay with the I'm getting the nod from the sponsors. We have a little bit of time and you two both seem willing. So I am going to subject you to Senator Hansen's question.
John Pirro and I go way back. You're on the hot seat again, John. No, actually, I just wondered if you guys had a chance to talk and see if we can work out the language. I mean, you just don't want it to be too broad, but you obviously want it to be in compliance with Adam Walsh Act and the 2018 decision, correct? Okay, that's all I was.
John Pirro for the record, Senator Hansen. That is correct. We did talk with Chairman DeRico, and we do want to work out a fix on this.
But you had a chance to talk prior to the hearing?
Yes.
Oh, you guys have? Okay. All right. Thank you.
I'll also take, a point of personal privilege to say that this hearing was scheduled very quickly, and I think both parties are working in good faith to work this out. And we decided to go ahead and hear the bill because it is short, so that the committee can start ruminating on it. But I would expect that we'll have some further conversations. I think we still have some more testimony to do. Anybody on the phone in opposition?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, one moment.
Jim Hoffman, representing NACJ. I would just like to echo what Mr. Pirro and Ms. Roth said. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that everybody on the phone? I'm going to go with yes.
There's one more caller.
Oh, sorry. That's what happens when you assume.
One moment. Caller with the last three digits, 037. You are unmuted and may begin. Caller, you are unmuted on our end. Please check to see if you are muted on your end.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Hi. Tanya Brown, Advocates for the Inmates and the Innocent. We oppose this bill. We echo the sentiments of the others in opposition. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Shara. The public line is open and working. However, there are no other callers wishing to testify in opposition at this time.
All right, then we will move to testimony in the neutral position. I don't see anybody coming to the table in Carson City or Las Vegas, so we'll go straight to the phone for testimony in the neutral position.
Testify neutrally to SB 67. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Thank you, Chair. There are no callers wishing to testify neutrally at this time.
All right, thank you. Then I will invite Director DeRico and your Deputy Director.
She thanks you for the promotion.
Parole Hearings Examiner.
Thank you, Hearings Examiner, to give some closing comments, maybe clarify anything that you think needs to be clarified.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. I want to start out with regard to a couple of the comments that were made with regard to this is going to change lifetime supervision and what's going on and who qualifies for under that. That's 100% not true. And it doesn't affect that. And once again, I will refer you to Section 5 of the bill specifically talks, that's a section, NRS 213.1243, that talks about lifetime supervision. That is a special sentence of supervision that only certain people that have been convicted of sex offenses are subject to. And this is what is added in here in this language in subsection 16 delineates right in there. As used in this section, sex offender means any person who has been convicted of a sexual offense as defined in paragraph B of subsection 5 of NRS 176.0931. Only those individuals qualify for lifetime supervision. Our request here doesn't change that, not one bit. So that was just an added delineation here inserted by LCB for clarity, which, like I said before, is outstanding. No more people get on lifetime supervision, no less people get on lifetime supervision. The only thing is that in here, and actually I'll start, because we did meet and we spoke on this. I spoke with the public defenders yesterday as well as today, and we discussed that this is a cleanup bill just so that our parole board statutes, which are primarily located in NRS 213, which is all that you have here before you, will all use the same definition in the parole statutes of sex offense. We want continuity. With that, we want to make things clear for us, the stakeholders, and the public. We already have several instances which I brought up within NRS 213 that refer to the definition of sexual offense as defined by 179.097. It's mentioned in 4 separate areas in NRS 213 already. It's already in there as law. Our only intent for this bill is to bring everything together under one definition. For the record, I would like to point out that all of the offenses enumerated in NRS 179D.097 are registerable sex offenses. This legislature has already determined what offenses by state law individuals must register as a convicted sex offender, meaning anyone convicted of those crimes in 179D must register here in the state of Nevada. It makes sense that we use the same definition in our parole board statutes, and we already have it in several places as mentioned. Our definition should align with the definition of NRS 179D, where it's already been determined by the legislature which crimes of convictions qualify. Additionally, this will also ensure that we are imposing appropriate sex offender conditions for anyone paroled for one of these offenses. With relation specifically to Section 3 of this bill that refers to NRS 213.1214, the statute directs the NDOC on which individuals require a mandatory sex offender assessment. Shouldn't we be using the same version of sexual offense in all parts of NRS 213? If an individual must register as a sex offender in this state per NRS 179D.097, why would we not want all offenses that trigger these registration requirements in our state to be properly assessed at a parole hearing? The sex offender assessment is another tool for the parole board to review the risk of a qualifying offender to reoffend sexually. This is a critical information for the parole board, and we should have that in all of these cases. As a citizen of the state, I believe that you would all agree that it would be better to have all individuals who have already been determined that have to register as a sex offender in this state, that the parole board have that information to have it do an assessment on them as well. Without that, we're missing some of these people. So they come to the parole board. We're not able to conduct an assessment because we have this old definition, or I'm sorry, not us, but NDOC can't conduct that assessment. So in essence, we're rolling the dice with this group that isn't listed under 179D, which I believe there's 4 differences in here. And so guess what? We don't get that additional assessment to make a good and informed decision. That's what we're looking for here. I know that in discussions a little bit earlier, there was some specific concerns with regard to subsections Q through R of NRS 179D.097. Subsection Q is sex trafficking pursuant to NRS 201.300. Presently, in statute to NRS 213, that is not included as a part of a sex offense right now. 179D includes that. Additionally, subsection R, any other offense that has the element has an element involving a sexual act or sexual conduct with another. Once again, right now, not captured for the assessment. Subsection S, an attempt or conspiracy to commit an offense listed in paragraphs Q2 inclusive. Once again, not captured right now, not getting an assessment before they have a parole hearing. Subsection T, an offense that's determined to be sexually motivated pursuant to NRS 175.547 or 207.193. Once again, it's part of NRS 179D. It's a registerable sex offense, but no assessment has to be done, and we don't have to. that they just go by the wayside, and we, I guess, cross our fingers on that. We want to be able to do the best job we can when we conduct our parole hearings. If an individual's been convicted of one of these 4 subsections I just mentioned, they must all register as a sex offender in this state. I ask you this: before you consider someone who qualifies as having committed a registrable sex offense, does the legislature want the parole board to also consider a specific sex offender assessment for these 4 sections as well? Or roll the dice like I've said? Specifically, I can break down each of these sections. I ask if individuals must register as a sex offender under subsection Q for sex trafficking. Shouldn't the parole board also do an assessment to determine what the risk to be reoffend in the community is?
I'm sorry to cut you off, but we are running a little bit short on time. We have committee hearings that start at 3:30, and I want to make sure that all of our members are able to get to those. And, you know, and it also sounds like some of my members still have some questions for you, so I want to get to those. I'll start with Senator Orenshaw.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Chair DeRico, under the proposed language here in this bill, there was testimony earlier from the Washoe PD that some juvenile offenders who are not currently subject to lifetime supervision might become subject to lifetime supervision. And I'm wondering, do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? You're reading this proposed language in SB 67, because that concerns me.
Chris DeRico, for the record. So, Senator, there is nothing, once again, in this. It's not expanding or doing anything to lifetime supervision. So more won't qualify or not qualify. This is a cleanup of Section 213. So every version of sexual offense within 213 has the same definition. We're not talking about lifetime supervision. Section 5 brings up lifetime supervision, but you'll notice there is not one mention of 179D in that section. Not one. It has nothing to do with lifetime supervision for this definition revision. In fact, that wouldn't even be in a part of this bill had LCB not caught that we could provide greater clarity under which offenses qualify under which sex offenses qualify for lifetime supervision and which do not. So yes, I do disagree with that.
Okay, thank you. I've got to do a little more research on that. Thank you, Chair.
Other questions? Vice Chair Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think consistency is definitely a virtue, but so is narrow tailoring, right? And I don't know if it's necessarily true that we want to do this for every sex offender that's in 179D. Maybe it is. But I think what some of the folks in opposition are suggesting is that maybe there are some people we don't want to catch, and there may be a reason why the definition should be slightly different for different applications, right? And so I think I'd just suggest that maybe we open up the idea of, is this necessary for everything that's currently under 179D? And if not, let's remove those and only put for the folks that we absolutely need to, although we may lose some of that consistency. Does that make sense?
I follow you, Senator Harris. Chris DeRico, for the record. So once again, I mean, I want to sit here and go that I'm hoping I'm putting this forward clearly. So the subsection, section 5, or I'm sorry, not section 5.
It's okay. We
May
don't
I
have
interrupt?
to go. We don't have to go through it now.
May I interrupt?
Yes.
This whole bill changes section 213 of the NRS, right? Or chapter 213.
Chris DeRico, for the record, just these sections.
Yes,
That's it.
yes, but it only affects 213. And 213 pertains to the assessment that somebody has to go through before they leave NDOC to be placed on parole, correct?
Chris DeRico, for the record, NRS 213 only one section of the bill, 1214, discusses the assessment.
Okay.
Correct.
So when we're talking about the group of people that are being caught in the net, let out of the net, whatever analogy we're using, the net is an assessment before you leave the Department of Corrections and get placed on parole. The net is not offender registration.
Chris DeRico, for the record, this assessment, so I'll take a step back. every individual, before they come before a parole hearing, the prisons do an assessment, a risk assessment on those individuals. And this law under 1214, 2131, 214 right now says anybody with these qualifying sexual offenses must also have a sex offender assessment as well. Okay? That is before they come to the parole board for a hearing, not on release or anything there. It's another tool. This assessment's for us before we hear that case to determine, hey, should we grant this individual for parole? Or is this a case that's maybe too high a risk because of the sex offender assessment? Whatever, it could be different factors here. So we receive that assessment before the parole hearing. It has nothing to do with the release. It's a tool that we use to determine, may this person be a good person to grant to the streets.
And Madam Chair, if I may, I think, so, consistency always goes two ways, and I'm not sure you aren't convincing me that we have too many people registering. Right? I know it's not, but they're using the same definition. Huh? You see that? So you're pulling the registration definition and saying everybody that registers needs this assessment. And I just don't know if that's necessarily true, right? And if it's not true, then we need to carve out the folks that don't need it, or we need to look at people who we're making register as sex offenders, right? One of those, it's not necessarily that the first is true, it could be the latter, right? And so, we don't have to work this out now, but I'm just suggesting these lists may not have to be the same. And I think what the people in opposition would like to do is dig in with you a little bit more on where this is necessary and not have assessments for people who don't need it.
May I respond real briefly on that? So 179D, we already know. Every offense in there, this legislature's determined is a registrable sex offense. And that's where, because this has already been determined, that it is, because they must register as a sex offender, why should we not do an assessment on each and every one of those individuals that the legislature has already told us has to register as a sex offender? We're not looking to add any other crime. We're just saying consistency. You must, I know, if I use an example, this person here has to register as a sex offender, and because of law, when they get released, we believe we should have that in assessment as well for the community for us to make a good informed decision. We're not creating anything. By law, they must register as a sex offender per the sex offender registry.
All right. I very much appreciate this conversation, and I thank Director DeRico, hearings officer, and my members for giving an excellent demonstration of the kinds of robust discussions we have in judiciary that are always aimed at reaching the best possible policy outcomes, and that's what we will continue to do in this case. And thank you for your presentation. At this time, I will close the hearing on SB 67 and move to the last item on our agenda for today, which is public comment. I see lots of people getting up. I don't know if they're coming to the table. Nope, they're going to the doors. They're fleeing. I don't see anybody coming up to the table for public comment in Carson City or Las Vegas, so we will go to the phones for public comment.
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to offer public comment for today's meeting, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Tanya Brown, Advocates for the Inmates and the Innocent. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. I have a couple of questions, or not a couple of concerns, because of the risk assessment. My concern is with this risk assessment. Now, if an inmate is maintaining their innocence and they do not admit guilt, because the parole board have repeatedly over decades have asked inmates who have maintained their innocence to admit their guilt, or they don't pass, or they don't get paroled to the street. Now, I know that in 2007, was it SB 201? They did put that in there because before they used to ask if they were appealing their conviction, they can no longer ask that. So does the risk assessment still have something like that to where the inmate is going to have to answer yes or no and possibly lie just in order to get a parole board and admit. I'd like to see the risk assessment. And secondly, I would like to say, welcome back, Director Sorrento. We have missed you. And that's all I really have to say. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Do we have anybody else for public comment?
Thank you, Chair. If there are any other callers wishing to offer public comment on the meeting at this time, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Anne Marie Grant for the record. I'd like to welcome the members back in, the new elected officials. My brother Thomas Purdy was 38 years old when he was murdered by Reno Police and Washoe County Sheriff's Office on October 8th, 2015. He was hogtied during a mental health crisis. He was a guest at the Peppermill Casino in Reno, and he asked security for help. Instead of helping him, they called Reno Police, who hogtied him for 40 minutes and then dumped him at the jail, still hogtied to be asphyxiated to death since the last legislative session ended. In 2021, 47 human beings, somebody's loved one, have died during interactions with police in Nevada, 438 since the year 2000. I hope that police reform wasn't just the fad of 2021 and that changes continue, because people are still dying in your state. Thank you.
BPS, do we have anybody else on the line?
Yes, Chair, there's another caller.
Okay. Presumably for public comment.
Hello?
We can hear you. Please go ahead with your public comment.
Yes, Mercedes Maharis, Nevada chaplain and member of the Nevada Silver-Haired Legislative Forum, Senate District 3. I find this very disturbing because the Sex Offender Committee was disbanded, as I understand it, and the Adam Walsh Act needs to be repealed or replaced. The lifetime supervision registration has been declared unconstitutional in Illinois and I believe South Carolina, possibly North Carolina. I don't have my notes in front of me. The risk assessment, I assume that Mr. DeRico is speaking of, is a static 99R. But I question whether the risk assessment has been properly vetted by NDOC, because they have unlicensed psychologists. I don't know if they have had certified training or not. I do not think that the static 99R is being helpful in a truthful way. Only one answer, and that's age, changes on it. And the rest of the numbers remain static. How do I know that? Because I worked on with Senator Sager-Bloom, the former Senator Sager-Bloom, in bringing a specialist in to disband the psych panel, because it was stopping prisoners from going before the board, the parole board, for years and years and years. Well, that thankfully fell by the wayside, but I don't understand why we have an unconstitutional lifetime registration stricken down in other states, and nobody studied it because the sex offender committee was disbanded. So this is very, very rough. And even today, a person called and said he had to take all of his notes because the psychologists were going in opposition to him, even though he finally got the static 99 ruled out. And there is a case, a legal case about this now. So I tried and tried to get in on the line, and it kept throwing me off to testify in opposition. So I am in opposition for this hearing. This 67 law. We need to stop the Adam Walsh Act and stop lifetime registration and stop this harassment that's happening for sex offenders who are mostly uneducated. They didn't get any help in understanding about sex. And that's the bottom line. So I hope that all of you will certainly take this into consideration. And we're supposed to have a governor that's speaking
Thank you
up
so
for
much.
education. Well,
Thank you. You have reached your
does-
2-minute time limit. We appreciate your public comment, and we'll have to conclude at this time. Is there another caller on the line?
No, Chair, there are no other callers wishing to offer public comment at this time.
All right. In that case, I will close public comment, and that brings us to the end of our agenda today. We do not have... We do not have committee tomorrow. I just confirmed with the people who actually are in charge. And we will have committee on Monday. We will see you there at 1 p.m. Thank you so much. This meeting is adjourned.